بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today this is the 32nd lesson in our series on this book Al-Uboodiyyah of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah with the commentary of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. And in the previous lesson we finished on the point that a person who claims to love something, then he would be willing to, bear harms and hardships and difficulties in order to win the love or the pleasure of that, thing or that person or being that he claims to love. As Ibn Taymiyyah said, وَمَعْلُومٌ أَنَّ الْمَحْبُوبَاتِ لَا تُنَالُ غالبا إلا باحتمال المكروهات. He says it's known that the things that a person loves, they are not obtained overwhelmingly except by bearing things which one does not like, bearing things which are dislikable, right? So you have to bear dislikable things in order to gain those things which you love. And so this is something universal. This is not, specific to any person of any creed. This is a universal thing which everybody knows and experiences in their life, that something that you have a liking for, that you love, then you have to bear harms and hardships and difficulties in order to attain them. So we finished off on that sentence. And Shaykh al-Fawzan, he made the comment here, and he said that, that which you love doesn't just come to you. There has to be some degree of effort and sacrifice. And so the clearest example of this, the greatest example of this, is paradise. Now, paradise, we know it's, as occurs in the hadith, it is surrounded by hardships and things which a person, dislikes. This is the nature of what paradise is surrounded with. Conversely, hellfire is surrounded by lusts and desires and likable things. So the Shaykh continues and says that paradise is something that a person loves, but it cannot be attained except by bearing hardships, doing righteous actions, striving in the path of Allah, spending, doing righteous deeds, right? So a person has to bear dislikable things. As the Shaykh mentions the hadith, in fact, حُفَّتِ الْجَنَّةُ بِالْمَكَارِحِ وَحُفَّتِ النَّارُ بِالشَّهَوَاتِ. The paradise is surrounded by dislikable things, and hellfire is surrounded by the desires, by lusts and desires. So that's where we finished in the previous lesson. We're going to continue from this point with the speech of Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah. So after mentioning that statement, he then says, سواء كانت محبة صالحة أو فاسدة. So in other words, this principle applies, what he just mentioned, this universal principle that before you can achieve something that you love, you have to bear hardships. This applies irrespective of whether the love is a legitimate, righteous type of love or a corrupt type of love, right? So this applies irrespective. So for example, let's say a man was to pursue a woman which is unlawful for him, or he was to, try to acquire wealth which is unlawful, which is haram, right? Still, that still applies, that he will not achieve that thing except by some degree of sacrifice and bearing some harms and so on and so forth. So this is a universal principle. It applies to everything. And so Ibn Taymiyyah continues, فَالْمُحِبُّونَ لِلْمَالِ وَالرِّئَاسَةِ وَالصُّوَرِ لا ينالون مطالبهم إلا بضرر يلحقهم في الدنيا مع ما يصيبهم من الضرر في الدنيا والآخرة. So he then says that those people who we find that they love wealth, for example, or they love leadership, they love power, or they love as-suwar, meaning here, like what they see of women and lusts and desires and which they seek and pursue, they will not achieve their goals except by way of some harm that's going to come to them in this life, alongside the hardships they're going to suffer as a result, both in this life and the hereafter. So all of this is just something we know from our own experience. This is the nature of the things that, to which we have an attachment or love in our heart. They bring with them hardships, difficulties, and in some cases they can also bring hardships in this life and also the next life when they are based upon a corrupt type of love, right, in relation to things which are unlawful. So from this point onwards, Ibn Taymiyyah then, rahimahullah, then makes a very important point, which is something that we should reflect upon as Muslims and as people of Tawheed. And so he says here, فَالْمُحِبُّ لِلَّهِ وَرَسُولِهِ إذا لم يحتمل ما يرى ذو الرأي من المحبين لغير الله مما يحتملون في حصول محبوبهم دل ذلك على ضعف محبتهم لله. So in essence what he says is that those people, or he who loves Allah and his messenger, so say there's a person who loves Allah and his messenger, or claims to, and if he is not willing to bear those harms and those hardships, those same types of hardships and difficulties which those people who love other than Allah, right? Because there are people who love other things besides Allah. They love, for example, non-Muslims who love their idols or the things that they worship or their deities, or it could be sinful Muslims who love, for example, pursuing their lusts and desires, right? So there's categories of people. So he says that when a person who loves Allah and his messenger, if he is not willing to bear those harms and difficulties which those people who love other than Allah, which they are prepared to bear because of the things that they love, then this indicates a weakness in his love of Allah. Right? This is very simple to understand. So for example, where this is leading towards is in fact the verse in the Quran in which Allah Azza wa Jal, he says, I'll come back to this point after mentioning this verse. So Ibn Taymiyyah says here, إذا كان ما يسلكه أولئك هو الطريق الذي يشير به الأقل ومن المعلوم أن المؤمن أشد حبا لله. So he says it's known that a believer is more intense in his love of Allah, as Allah the Most High says, ومن الناس من يتخذ من دون الله أندادا يحبونهم كحب الله. Amongst mankind are those who take as rivals other than Allah, and they love them more than they love Allah. So let's just wrap this whole point up and decipher what is being said. So we know that a person of Tawheed, he singles out Allah in worship because he loves Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal is loved bidhatihi, for his essence. He is the only thing that we love for his essence. Everything else besides Allah is loved for the sake of Allah, because of Allah. It's not loved in and of itself. So only Allah Azza wa Jal is loved in his essence directly, right? So and then there are other people who erect deities, right? So they erect gods, they erect deities, and they love them with a type of love that should only be for Allah. And then they are willing to endure hardships and difficulties and trials and tribulations and suffer loss and harm in order to please those things because of the love that they have for those things. Right. So a believer, because he loves Allah Azza wa Jal and his love is more pure, then a believer must be more willing to endure the same types of harms and difficulties and hardships than those people are willing to endure. Do you understand? Like it doesn't make sense, for example, that if there's a mushrik, Hindu, for example, and he worships his, the multi-headed animal or whatever it is that he worships, and he's willing to climb over mountains and to swim the seas and to endanger his life and to, endure all sorts of harms and spend from his wealth, right, to please that deity or to, fulfill the whatever thing he loves in relation to that deity. It's impossible for him to do that and then a believer not have the same type of love and sacrifice for Allah Azza wa Jal. It's simply not possible, right? And that's what the point that Ibn Taymiyyah he is mentioning, that if a believer cannot bear and is not willing to bear and cannot bear that type of hardship with which those people who love other than Allah and worship other than Allah, which they are prepared to bear, then this is clearly an indication of the weakness of his love, right? It can't clearly be a strong type of love for Allah Azza wa Jal. And so that's the point that Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah is mentioning here. And Shaykh al-Fawzan comments on this point in the notes, and he says that there is no one who claims that he loves Allah, that he loves the Messenger of Allah, except that he must bear in the path of Allah that which he dislikes and that which is hardship upon him. Just like those who love other than Allah, they bear types of hardships for the sake of those whom they love, and they sacrifice, they make effort and they expend from themselves and their wealth, for the sake of their deities, because they love them with an intense and severe type of love. So Ibn Taymiyyah continues and he says, yes, sometimes نعم قد يسلك المحب لضعف عقله وفساد تصوره طريقا لا يحصل بها المطلوب. So he says, sometimes you can find a person who he loves, for example, he loves Allah, or he loves something from the things which are permissible to love and pursue in the worldly affairs, but because of the weakness of his aql, his intellect, right, he's weak-minded in his intellect, what he does is, and also because of a corruption in his thought and his imagination, he might take a path that he thinks is going to help him reach the goal, but which actually isn't. Right? So where Ibn Taymiyyah now is leading to, what we should pay attention to, is leading to the fact that it's one thing to have a mahbub, to love something, and then it's also another thing to actually pursue the right path, right, to reach that end, right? So in other words, let me illustrate this with examples. So there is Allah Azza wa Jal, who is loved, and then in the pursuit of his love you follow means which are legitimate and valid and acceptable to Allah Azza wa Jal, right? But then also you can claim to be someone who loves Allah Azza wa Jal, but you can also pursue means which are illegitimate, which are invalid, and which do not reach to him, right? As we see with innovations, misguidance, people worshipping Allah through things or ways and means which he did not reveal, inventing acts and types of worship, right? This is not a valid means. So likewise in the worldly affairs, in all the worldly affairs, there's exactly the same thing. Like you can, someone might, for example, someone wants to acquire wealth, right? And so there's a lawful way of acquiring wealth, which is, you engage in trade, or the physical labor that you have, you take compensation for it, and all the various things, right? This is a legitimate means. It achieves the objective. But at the same time, stealing also achieves the objective, right? It's still it's a means that actually works, right? So you can rob people, you can burgle people, and you can acquire wealth. It actually works, right? But just because it works doesn't mean that it's lawful, right? So not everything which is a means is actually lawful in the Sharia, right? You can have a child in so many different ways, but not all of them are lawful. You can acquire wealth, but not always, not all of them are actually lawful. So the point Ibn Taymiyyah is mentioning here is that some people who love something, because of a corrupt intellect or a corrupt imagination, they follow a path which is not actually going to lead to the thing that they are pursuing. Ibn Taymiyyah says here, فمثل هذه الطريق لا تحمد إذا كانت المحبة صالحة محمودة فكيف إذا كانت المحبة فاسدة والطريق غير موصل. So he makes the point here, which is that that a person might, because of his weak intellect and corrupt imagination, he might pursue a path that doesn't make him reach the goal, right? So this type of path that he is following is not praiseworthy if his love is a righteous type of love. How then will it be if his love is a corrupt type of love? Right. So what's being explained here is to show that there's different categories of people, and they have different goals and objectives or love, and they pursue the means, right? And those means could be valid and invalid. And the love that they have could be corrupt or could be, righteous. So therefore you have different categories of people that exist, whether in the religious pursuits, which is what we are talking about here, and even in the worldly pursuits, right? So sticking to the examples I gave before, you have a person of Tawheed upon the Sunnah, loves Allah, loves the Messenger, and he follows the Sunnah, sticks to the Sunnah. So he's a person with a righteous love and with a genuine path, right? So there's the objective and then the means, right? Then you have a person who says he loves Allah and the Messenger, but he's engrossed in innovations, right? He thinks that, singing poems and this and whatever, and without acting upon the obligations and things like that, sticking to the Sunnah, he thinks this is going to earn him the love of Allah. So this is a mistake. The love is righteous, is correct, right? It's a love for Allah Azza wa Jal, but the means is invalid. And then in the worldly affairs, you could have someone, like for example, marriage. A person wants to get married, or wants to keep chaste, so he wants to keep chaste. And so marriage is the means, right? And he wants to have children, so marriage is the means. Conversely, someone might want to fulfill his desires in an unlawful way, right? Or someone might want to steal and acquire wealth in an unlawful way, right? And he does so using means which actually work. But then you might also have a thief who is stupid, and he might try means to acquire wealth which actually don't work, right? So so there's all of these different types of categories of people. So Shaykh al-Fawzan makes the comment here around this whole point, and especially the point that a believer is more intense in his love for Allah. Shaykh al-Fawzan says that لأنهم, because the believers love Allah with a mahabba which is khalisa, right? It is pure. It is not mixed with anything else. There's no shirk. There is no when we see the polytheists, we see that they love Allah, they have a love for Allah, and then they also have a love for their deities and for the other things that they worship. Right? So this is a mixed and a tainted type of love. And so therefore their love isn't really a pure type of love. Right? And because it's not a pure type of love, then, as opposed to a believer, his love is purely for Allah Azza wa Jal. It is a khalisa, it is a pure type of love. And this is why the believer is more intense in his love for Allah, and why he is more willing to sacrifice and bear harm, right, and strive in order to please he whom he claims to love, because the love is pure, right? And this goes back to the point that we mentioned earlier. How can it be? So the general overall point here is, how can a believer, a person of Tawheed, not be more diligent and more determined and willing to bear more harms and make more sacrifices, right, in pleasing Allah and being on the path to Allah and aiding His cause, than, for example, a mushrik, who's worshipping a monkey, all right, or another one who's worshipping, a piece of wood or a cross or something. How can that be the case? That can't be the case, because the believer's love for Allah is khalisa, it is pure. This is pure love, whereas these other types of love are tainted, corrupted, mixed, shared, and so the love clearly cannot be that strong. Rather, the love of those people is more intense for their deities than it is for Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So, anyway, this is all showing really the effect of ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. This should be one of the manifestations of ubudiyyah to Allah Azza wa Jal. So the fact that, and this allows us to clearly see as well, to analyze and to take stock of what's going on, that if we see, for example, greater efforts by way of, for example, the missionaries, for example, right, Christian missionaries, or we see greater efforts from the Yahud and the Nasara and the Mushrikeen and things like that, and greater sacrifices, and in order to pursue their cause, then that means clearly we must clearly, as Muslimin, we must have a clear weakness in the muhabba, in the love, and therefore in the ubudiyyah, the servitude to Allah. So all of these things, they follow on from what the points which are being raised here. So then Ibn Taymiyyah continues, and he gives an example of those types of people that he just mentioned, with a corrupt type of love, following a method that doesn't even work. Right? That's the worst type of situation to be in. To have a corrupt type of love, and then to pursue a method or a route to reach it, which actually doesn't even work. Right? So he says, كما يفعله المتحورون في طلب المال والرئاسة والصور في حب أمور توجب لهم ضررا. So he says, ولا تحصل لهم مطلوبا. He says, like, for example, what is done by those misguided people who pursue wealth, and they pursue leadership, and they pursue like images, meaning images of lusts and desires that they pursue. They pursue all of this in things which is going to bring them harm, and yet they do not even achieve what they desire. Right? So they have a corrupt type of love, and they never reach what they're trying to pursue anyway. Right? This is the worst type of situation to be in. Like we said, many examples, like you could have a thief, who desires to steal from people and burgle people, but he's so incompetent and thick that he never reaches his goal, right? So he even doesn't get the reward of his evil crime. Meaning, like, it's a really sad situation to be in. At least as a criminal, at least try to benefit from the thing that you're trying to pursue, right? Because you're going to get punished for it, right? So you've at least achieved some benefit in the worldly sense, even though what you're doing is unlawful, right? And you're going to get punished for it, right? But even worse is the one who has the same type of corruption, but he uses means because of the corruption of his intellect and his imagination, and he doesn't achieve what he's trying to achieve, right? But his evil is still the same because his intent is still there, but he never benefited, in the worldly sense. So he's still going to get punished. So you're in a worse situation, right? So you have also this category of people, to keep in mind. And as Ibn Taymiyyah says, this is the worst type of situation to be in. Then he says, then he continues, after concluding all of this point, he says, وَإِذَا تَبَيَّنَ هَذَا, when all of this is clear, meaning all of this discussion that we've been making, in this lesson so far, and in the previous lesson, the general point he was making was that that for you not to be captivated and attached to material things, you have to be captivated and enslaved to Allah Azza wa Jal. And in order for that to happen, there are many traits and qualities that a believer must possess. And one of those key traits and key qualities is that you love for the sake of Allah and that you hate for the sake of Allah, right? And that you love Allah and His Messenger more than you love anything else. So the issue of love here is the key central element here, because the heart and its love is the foundation of worship, right? Love is the foundation of worship. Everything springs from this love. And so therefore, this is why there's all of this discussion about love, right? Loving Allah and, loving His Messenger and loving, giving them precedence and so on and so forth. And then along the path, Ibn Taymiyyah discussed about how a person can love wealth and love women and love authority and love power and love many other things, right? And then he tried to pursue them, and then he tried to pursue them either with genuine means or illegitimate means, and he'll just get caught up and confused in all of that, and it affects his servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. So when all of this is clear, Ibn Taymiyyah says, وَإِذَا تَبَيَّنَ هَذَا, when all of this is clear, he then says, فَكُلَّمَا ازْدَادَ الْقَلْبُ حُبًّا لِلَّهِ ازْدَادَ لَهُ عُبُودِيَّةً وَكُلَّمَا ازْدَادَ لَهُ عُبُودِيَّةً ازْدَادَ لَهُ حُبًّا وَحُرِّيَّةً عَمَّا سِوَاهُ. He says, so therefore, when all of this is clear, every time the heart increases in its love for Allah, then its servitude to Allah will also increase. And every time its servitude to Allah increases, then its love and being free from those which are besides Him also increases. Meaning that you become less enslaved to other than Allah, right? Because as we've discussed previously in these lessons, we said that a man can become enslaved to many things. Can be a slave to his wife, and he can be a slave to his wealth. He can be a slave to luxury. He can be a slave to his desires. He can be a slave to authority, to power, to so many different things. You can become a slave to. You can become addicted and a slave to narcotics and drugs and things like that. You can become a slave to all these different things. So the line is that the more he increases in his love for Allah, the more he becomes enslaved to Allah. And the more he becomes enslaved to Allah, then this will bring him freedom, true freedom from slavery to other things besides Allah. Right? He will not become a slave to other things besides Allah Azza wa Jal. So Shaykh al-Fawzan, he comments upon this, and he says, love is a quality which actually agitates a person, it moves a person, it mobilizes a person to action. And likewise, loving other than Allah is also something that mobilizes a person to action. This again is something universal, as we said before. If there's love in your heart, it's going to move you to action, irrespective of what that love is for, right? Is it, it could be a love for an idol, right? It could be a love for some deity. It could be love. Irrespective, this same principle applies. Whatever the heart is filled with of love for a thing, by necessity, it is going to make you move, to mobilize, right? It's going to instill an irada, a wish, a desire. So, as the Shaykh says, love for a thing, hiya al-ba'ithu, it is something that motivates you or drives you to try to achieve, the thing that you want to achieve, and to bear hardships as a result of it, right? So then after this, after all of this is clear, Ibn Taymiyyah then says, continuing the line of discussion, he says, وَالْقَلْبُ فَقِيرٌ بِالذَّاتِ إِلَى اللَّهِ مِنْ وَجْهَيْنِ. The heart is in need of Allah, right? The heart, as in its essence, is in need of Allah from two angles. مِنْ جِهَةِ الْعِبَادَةِ, from the angle of worship, وَهِيَ الْعِلَّةُ الْغَائِيَّةِ, and this is the end goal, or the final cause, the final purpose. وَمِنْ جِهَةِ الْإِسْتِعَانَةِ وَالتَّوَكُّلِ, and secondly, from the angle of seeking aid and reliance, وَهِيَ الْعِلَّةُ الْفَاعِلِيَّةِ, and this is the efficient cause, this is the effective cause, right? So let's just stop here and just elaborate upon this sentence. What does it mean? So what Ibn Taymiyyah says, this is now speaking about the heart, right? This organ that we have in our bodies, which is the king of all of the other limbs, and the limbs follow this organ, this heart. And so he says the heart, in its essence, as in and of itself, in its essence, is needy of Allah from two angles. The first is it's in need of worshipping Allah, and this is what he calls al-illatul gha'iyya. It is the final purpose, or the final cause, right? So this is clearly from the verse in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I did not create jinn and men except to worship me. So here, the purpose, the end goal, the objective is clearly explained. It is to worship Allah Azza wa Jal, right? And so the heart, therefore, is in need of Allah Azza wa Jal. The heart is in need of worshipping Allah Azza wa Jal, right? The heart is in need of that. And this is what he calls al-illatul gha'iyya. This is like the final cause, right? There's a discussion here to do with, types of causes. And these terms here, al-illatul gha'iyya, al-illatul fa'iliyya, these are technical terms. Just to give you a very quick example of the different types of causes. Like, if I have the table here, the table is used for eating from, reading from, studying from. This is like the end objective. This is the al-illatul gha'iyya, right? This is the end cause, the end objective, right? So that's at the end. And then you have the material. This is the material cause, which is the wood. And then you have the what they call the formal cause, which is like when you actually sit down and you design the table. So someone's got to design the table. Then there's the efficient cause, or the effective cause, which is carpentry, the person who actually performs the actions to bring this into being. Right? There's different types of causes. So these terms that Ibn Taymiyyah is using here, al-illatul gha'iyya, al-illatul fa'iliyya, these are just some technical terms. Here, all they're referring to is the end goal and the means to reach that goal. The end goal and the means to reach that goal. Very simple. Right? So the heart needs Allah in two ways. The first of those ways is the fact that there is actually an end goal and a purpose which exists, which is to worship Allah. Right? The heart is created to worship Allah. Right? So this is one. And the second is that for it to worship Allah, it needs to seek aid from Allah and place reliance upon Allah. Right? So this now is the means by which the heart arrives at the end goal, which is to worship Allah. Right? And as we shall see very shortly, this is summarized and expressed in one single verse in the Quran, at the very beginning of the Quran, and it is إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Right? إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ, you alone do we worship, وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, and from you alone do we seek aid and assistance. Right? So إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ, you alone do we worship, this is the goal. Right? This is the purpose. And إِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ, this is the means, this is the root, this is the mechanism or the means. And the heart needs both. One as the end goal, as the objective, and one as the actual means to that end goal. Right? So Ibn Taymiyyah then, rahimahullah, he then says, فَالْقَلْبُ لَا يَصْلُحُ وَلَا يُفْلِحُ وَلَا يَلْتَذُّ وَلَا يُسَرُّ وَلَا يَطِيبُ وَلَا يَسْكُنُ وَلَا يَطْمَئِنُ إِلَّا بِعِبَادَةِ رَبِّهِ وَحُبِّهِ وَالْإِنَابَةِ إِلَيْهِ. He then says, therefore the heart, it can never ever be rectified, nor be successful, nor taste any pleasure, nor be pleased, nor feel good, and nor be at ease, nor be tranquil, except by the worship of its Lord, and by love of Him and turning back to Him. Right, so here basically, because the heart has been created to worship Allah, then true satisfaction, true serenity, true ease, true tranquility, true rectification can only ever lie in the worship of its Lord. Right? So this goes back to the point that we finished with in the previous lesson, where we mentioned that the discussion is going to go in that direction, where the distinction is going to be made between a believer, a person of Tawheed, whose heart is filled with the love of Allah, which leads him to Uboodiyyah, enslavement to Allah, which in turn is going to bring him all of these types of strengths, right? And these benefits of the heart being rectified and being tranquil and at ease. And in contrast, you find that those hearts which either are completely devoid of any, like for example an atheist or a materialist, for example, or a heart in which there is shirk, right? So there's love of Allah and love of other things, other deities besides Allah. You will find that a type of resilience and strength with a believer in encountering the trials and the tribulations of life, you will see such resilience there that you will not see with those types of people. Right? And we mentioned previously as well that just simply if you look at where are the most suicides on the earth, you find it's in these atheistic countries, in China, in Japan, in the Scandinavian countries, right? These are the people who kill themselves because by necessity, in your view, in your belief, you have to be pessimistic. Pessimistic is always to have a negative view of everything. Why? Because you're going to die and there's nothing going to come after that. And so your life really is, there's no meaning to your life. There's as much meaning to your life as there is in the feces of a dog. Right? And This is a logical conclusion that you've got to come to. And so these people, like I mentioned before, there's actual statements from these people where they acknowledge, they admit that, that in a purely materialist, atheistic viewpoint where, there's no meaning, there's no purpose, there's a point at which it hits you so much that life is not even worth living because it's so pointless. And so that's what happens to a lot of these people when they come to the intellectual realization that my existence is as meaningful as the feces of a dog, right? It just hits them. And many of these people, like I said, there's no point living anymore. It's all make believe. You see, it's all. Once you come to that realization, you have to invent your purpose for living. There isn't an objective purpose for living. You have to invent your own, right? So you have to deceive yourself. You have to kid yourself. It's all just make-believe. That's what it is. And so that's why amongst the atheists, these people, that you find the most amount of suicides and, despair in life and, things of that nature. And those people who are otherwise, because many of these people, they'll come and they'll start, well, no, I'm satisfied in this, whatever, but intellectually, you are just deceiving yourself. You're kidding yourself because you're intellectually forcing yourself to live a lie, right? Because objectively, there's no meaning behind anything. Because, if I said to an atheist, if I tied you up and decided to kill you, for example, what logical, objective reason could you give as to why that's wrong? Because at the end of the day, the strong survive, and Darwinian evolution, the survival of the fittest and whatever, and at the end of the day, that's just part and parcel of this material world that we live in. So, what reason have you got to complain about anything that's happening in the world? There shouldn't be, but yet you do. And you try to blame it on some God that you believe is actually imaginary. So how does that even make sense? You're always finding fault with the people of Iman and saying, oh, this God, that you believe in. But in your view, there actually isn't a God. So why are you just inventing a God to put all the blame on when there isn't one in your belief, and then you use that as a battering ram against the people of Iman? The whole thing, it doesn't make any sense. It's all nonsensical, right? It's all nonsensical. So because these people come to this realization eventually, then they become so depressed and they kill themselves. In fact, it just came to my mind, this man, what's he called, Hitchens. This guy, the atheist, well-known atheist, Hitchens?
Peter.
Huh?
Peter.
Peter Hitchens. Was it Peter Hitchens? Or there's two of them. One's a journalist and one's the atheist who died.
I think that was Chris. Yeah.
Oh, it's Christopher Hitchens. That's him, yeah. Well, he was one of the top atheists for how many years? And in his final days, he was sat there reading the Bible with a priest. In his final days, to get comfort, he was reading a Bible. Right, look up this man, Christopher Hitchens. This man is a notorious. He's one of the new atheists, who's launching a war against religion, and particularly against Islam, right? And because he got cancer, and when he got cancer and he knew he was going to die, then it wasn't publicized very much. You have to dig this information. He sat there with the Christian priest reading a Bible, right? So as I was saying, the point that we were making was, oh yes, that's it. That the people of Iman are resilient and strong, and by virtue of their love of Allah and their servitude to Allah, and they are not enslaved to other things besides Allah, right? Because that's the that's the downfall, that's the weakening point. And so it gives them a resilience and a strength that you do not find with the people of kufr and the people of shirk. And so Ibn Taymiyyah then, rahimahullah, continues to make the same point. ولو حصل له كل ما يلتذ به من المخلوقات لم يطمئن ولم يسكن إذ فيه فقر ذاتي إلى ربه. So then he says, if every type of delicious, nice thing came to him from the created things, he would still never reach that tranquility and satisfaction, right? Because he has there is a faqrun dhati, meaning that there is an essential need of the heart for its Lord, because Allah is its deity, and so the heart is in need of it, and it is only through that a person receives joy and happiness and blessing and favor and tranquility. So the point here then is that, as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, that if a person was to receive every type of thing of dominion, kingship, wealth, offspring, good health, and all types of things that the person enjoys, of eating things and drinking things and clothes that a person wears, the heart would never ever find satisfaction in those things. And this is true. We know that from what we see, what we hear, from the richest, most wealthiest people being the most despicable, depressed, unhappy people on earth. Despite all the riches, you see even some of these people, they have so much money that they don't like the way they look, and then they get caught up in this plastic surgery, and then they go on this, and then they become so deformed, and it's all mental. It began as something mental. They weren't satisfied to begin with, right? So the riches never gave them that satisfaction. So then they started thinking, maybe if I alter my face, I'll become happy. And then they become even more and more miserable, right? So and that's with them having everything that they could dream of having: riches, wealth, islands, yachts, boats, planes, everything you could imagine. They're still not satisfied. Why? Because the satisfaction is the satisfaction of the heart. The tranquility is the tranquility of the heart. And so, as Shaykh al-Fawzan says, all of these things, they are temporary, they end, they finish. Like all these things, they don't last, they expire. And as he says, لا يبقى إلا الله سبحانه وتعالى وما أريد به وجهه. That nothing will remain except Allah and whatever is sought, whatever things are sought for His face. Whatever His face is sought for, which means the righteous deeds. These are the only things that are going to remain. Allah Azza wa Jal, and that which is sought for His sake, which are the righteous deeds which are sincerely done for Him. And I think what we can do is we can finish on this point, inshallah, today for today's lesson. Ibn Taymiyyah continues on elaborating on the same point, and we'll stop here for today, inshallah, and continue in the next lesson. So we'll end there. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.